Uh, all right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zhang. I'm associate professor from Virginia Tech, and today I'm going to present our work about multi-sector resilience framing during Hurricane Laura, a large language model assisted analysis of Twitter data. So this study is from a project supported by the U.S. National Science Foundation. So before I talk about this study, I'm going to briefly talk about the project so it provides the context information for this study. So if some of you have read the hurricane season after action reports prepared by FEMA, which is the US Federal Emergency Management Agency, you will see one of the key messages FEMA tries to tell all Americans is, don't just rely on us. According to FEMA, the work of emergency management does not belong just to FEMA. It's the responsibility of the whole community, federal, state, and local government, private sector partners, and private citizens to build this collective capacity for the disasters we'll inevitably face. And it's not just FEMA. Many researchers and organizations have been emphasizing, building a disaster resilient community is a shared responsibility among multi-sector stakeholders, including the public sector, NGO, private industries, and our community residents. But the problem is, when you try to engage these many stakeholders from all different sectors, they come with very diverse needs and priorities, which are deeply rooted in their value systems. And in our research, we define stakeholder value systems as the ranked system of things that are of fundamental importance, merit, and utilities to the stakeholders. And we don't think stakeholder value systems are static. We think they are dynamically changing. They can change throughout the event of a disaster, and they can also be influenced by the other stakeholders. So some examples of some of the stakeholder values in the context of disaster could be like life safety to community residents and profitability to home developers, system integrity to structural engineers, or resource efficiency to planners. And according to Short theory of basic human values, these values are the key factors in predicting and explaining people's behaviors and decisions. And every one of us could hold numerous values with varying degrees of importance, so it forms our own value system. And the differences in people's value system can cause conflicts and disputes in the decision making. And I can give you a very simple example here. For example, when people in Florida, they try to decide if they want to install hurricane shutters or high impact windows for their new residential homes, as a tenant, they would prioritize their personal safety and efficiency and preparedness, because installing hurricane shutters is very dangerous and takes time. And trust me, I've done that before and I don't want to do it again. All right, so they would prefer, high impact windows, because that's a very easy solution. But then for home developers or owners, they've been prioritized, the financial related values like the initial cost and return on investment. So they would prefer just to prepare the hurricane shutters as long as it meets the functional requirements, is compliant with the law, right? So this is just very simple example to see some of the conflicts caused by people's differences in the value systems. And in reality, there are many of those cases. And these conflicts not only lead to delays in the future investments, but also it costs billions of millions of dollars in future losses. So there is really a need for us to identify, reconcile, and integrate these value systems in the decision making, so we can allow these stakeholders to resolve the conflicts, reach consensus, and eventually guide the collective decision. So in our research, we built this values to value framework and to help these different stakeholders better collaborate and integrate their values. And this framework has several key components here. And the first one is we want to identify and understand, what do stakeholders value? What do they prioritize in disaster? So we collected and analyzed data from like interviews and surveys and social media. And then given the diversities and variations in stakeholders' value system, we then try to reconcile these different values. So we built this stakeholder value unification model by integrating social network analysis, deep reinforcement learning, and conditional game theory. And then we want to evaluate different resilience strategies based on people, stakeholders' collective collective value systems. So basically the idea here is we don't want to just make this evaluation based on the technical performance of those resilient solutions, but rather, we want to see what are those values that are well aligned with the stakeholders' value system. And eventually we validated and applied our framework through a decision support system and stakeholder engagement toolkit. So my presentation today actually focused on the very last part of this framework, and we want to allow for real-time analysis of the stakeholder value system so our system can offer some real-time decisions to the stakeholders. And for this part of the work, we leverage social media data. And we built this tweet analysis framework. So we, from data collection to data analysis, it's kind of 5-step pipeline. I'm going to talk about some of the key steps in this framework. So first of all, we want to classify all the tweets into different stakeholder categories based on our previously conducted stakeholder interviews. And so we designed this tweet analysis framework called IDAP-APE. And here APE stands for Automatic Prompt Engineer. So this is a framework that we designed to eliminate manual effort in prompt construction, because that's a lot of efforts and it can be, it can be uncertain and make error. So this framework can generate and optimize the prompts for tweet classification based on genetic algorithm. And also to support few-shot prompting, we want to include some exemplars as part of the prompt. And we don't want to just include those exemplars at random. Instead, we want to pick those exemplars that are most informative and offer highest learning value for the model, which means, where the model can make mistake or where the model is most uncertain about. So we evaluate and pick those exemplars based on their classification performance through like disagreement, entropy, and error rate. And we then, our framework was able to achieve very high accuracy of around 0.69. And we compared this performance against several traditional supervised machine learning approach, and our model achieved the best performance. And the next part, we want to classify the tweet users into different stakeholder sectors and groups. So we also built another framework called TSSC. So this is a framework that is able to classify tweet users based on only their username and their basic profile description. And the framework is able to infer every user's affiliation and occupation based on this information. And it combines several prompting strategies together with some contextual improvements like integrating the definition of stakeholders and integrating with Google Search API to provide more affiliation information. So for this framework, we were able to achieve a high accuracy of around 0.84, which again is higher than some of the other supervised machine learning approaches we compare with. So after we classify the tweets into those different value categories and classify the user into different stakeholder groups, we are able to analyze how these values were discussed by each stakeholder sector through social media data. And we measure how intensively each value is being discussed through this racial index, and we try to measure it across different stakeholder sectors and before and after a disaster event. And we then use Manvit's Liu test and Kruskal-Wallis H test to measure and to analyze and see if the changes are significantly different. So here I would like to just present some of our partial results using Hurricane Laura data. And you can see, first of all, we classify all the collected tweets into this 14 value stakeholder value hierarchies. And we classify them based on Stewart theory of basic human value into like conservation, openness to change, self-transcendence, self-enhancement categories. And again, partial results here. So this is a figure that shows how the value has been changing before and after the landfall of the hurricane. And you can see some clear shifts here. And before the landfall or in the early phases of the disaster, people tend to care more about some of the values that are related to their immediate needs. For example, like safety and security, communication, and knowledge and education. And after the landfall, people tend to focus more on like comfort, health, resource efficiency, environmental and infrastructure restoration, collaboration, and some other value. And some long-term values like the innovation and economic recovery, these are relatively stable throughout the disaster. So this is somehow trying to prove and show how people's value priorities can be shifting and changing, evolving in the disaster context. And this is figure that shows, the comparison of stakeholder value priorities across different sectors. You can see quite some consistencies across these 5 sectors, including public, private, NGO, academia, and community residents. So in general, like safety, communication, and collaboration, these are highly prioritized by all these different sectors. We can also see some important differences, right? For example, for the public agencies, they tend to focus more on social welfare improvement, and for private industries, they focus more on like financial assistance, infrastructure restoration, and economic recovery. So basically, understanding where their value system can align and where they diverge is very critical for us to design the strategy in a way that can collectively address all these different needs and concerns. So this work lays the foundation for our work on reconciling the different stakeholder value priorities and evaluating different strategies from stakeholder-centered perspective. And also it supports the development of our decision support system, because rather than treating the stakeholder values as something static and don't change, in our system, we keep monitoring the stakeholders' value systems, and when new information comes in, we can see which value becomes more or less important for each stakeholder at different phases of a disaster. And then our system can recommend and provide real-time decision support. For example, the system can tell you, what recovery action should be prioritized, and what resources should be allocated, and what kind of immediate needs of the stakeholders should be addressed and pay more attention to. And eventually, so this is a system that not only tell you which actions or which strategies are effective, but rather, what are those strategies that best address the stakeholders' most immediate needs and in a timely manner. So to conclude, today I presented our work about this dynamic analysis for stakeholder value system, leveraging this large language model-based tweet analysis framework. And this contributes to human-centered disaster resilience planning and evaluation. Eventually, it support more resilience practices that offer higher social acceptance and address the community priorities. I would like to acknowledge support from the National Science Foundation, and thank you all. Is there any questions? That is a great question. So actually, when we classify that